Mr. Cain, if I can just first of all introduce you to the inquiry then, please. You are Christopher Cain, is that correct?
Yes.
You are a Director of North Point Aviation Services Limited, which is a consultancy specialising in strategic policy and commercial advice to the aviation, travel and tourism sectors, is that right?
That's correct.
You hold a Bachelor of Arts Honours and a Master of Arts in Geography from Pembroke College, Oxford University, is that correct?
Yes.
And you have a Masters of Philosophy in Town and Country Planning from the University of Newcastle upon Tyne.
Indeed.
You are a member of the Institute of Economic Development, the Royal Geographical Society and the Air Transport Research Society, is that right? And the evidence that you have prepared and provide for this appeal is true, and you confirm that the opinions expressed in it are your true opinions, is that right?
I do.
Well, Mr. Cain, what I'm going to ask you to do, please, I'm going to ask you to take out your summary proof of evidence, and can I just make sure that you've got your microphone on so that everybody can hear what you're saying?
Hello?
Right, that's better, yeah.
Can everyone hear Mr. Cain? Because I'm aware that he's facing me rather than you. Are you having difficulty hearing him?
No, we
You
were.
can hear him. Okay. If you have your microphone on, Mr. Cain,
Yes, that's fine.
it should be okay.
Okay, sure.
Right. Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. Now, Mr. Cain, you've got your microphone on now, which means that mine's been switched off. So which some may be quite pleased about. But what I suggest is that when you're speaking, if you can press the button, when I'm speaking, I'll press the button, and hopefully everybody can hear what everybody's saying. So it's my turn to press the button now.
So, Mr. Cain, can I ask you please to take out your summary proof of evidence, and I'm going to ask you, because there are members of the public here, so it's important that everybody understands what's being said and what you're saying. Can I ask you please to read from paragraph 1.2 of your summary?
Microphone on. I'm a transport and economic planner who's specialised in aviation since 1998, which time I joined the Airports Policy Division of the Department of Transport as Head of Airports Policy. During the subsequent 8 years, I was responsible for the development of regional airports policy across the UK and for running many of the large-scale technical studies and consultations that underpinned the preparation of the 2003 Air Transport White Paper. In April 2006, I left the department to become the Airport Director at Newquay Cornwall Airport, working for Cornwall County Council. My job was to transform what was a large, underused ex-RAF airfield, not unlike Manston is now, into a fledgling, fully licensed civilian airport, and to begin developing its commercial profile within the industry. I was engaged between 2011 and 2013 by Infratil, the then owners of Manston, in a consultancy capacity to prepare representations to the Airports Commission or the Davies Commission on its strategic long-term potential. This means that I'm familiar with the passenger and freight markets and the prospects for the airport, and I'm confident that River Oaks' proposals will succeed where others have previously not. Crucially, this is because River Oaks' proposals depart from the previous unsuccessful business models for the airport by placing an explicit emphasis on the need for a diversified range of activities underpinned by a state-of-the-art cargo operation to drive the airport's future revenues, rather than relying, as hitherto, principally on passenger services. By 2011, having suffered the travails of acquiring Manston and Prestwick just before the economic downturn in 2008, Infratil did not have the commitment or the resources to make large-scale investments in Manston that its status as a potentially important UK infrastructure asset merited.
Just pausing there, please, Mr. Cain. Can you help with this? In your view, why did Infratel not make a success of Manston Airport?
They're a New Zealand company that were based obviously on the other side of the world, and they had 3 airports in Europe. And they didn't, or they weren't willing to put sufficient investment into upgrading the facilities at Manston to attract carriers. There was a bit of a hangover from the EU Jet experience when they first bought the airport, and then by 2008, only 3 years later, we went straight into a full recession. And during the recessionary period, small airports suffered in terms of traffic, at being able to attract traffic more than the larger airports did. I think it's fair to say that when they could not find an immediate recipe without major investment, they took the view, or at least their shareholders took the view, that this was an investment on the other side of the globe that was costing them money, and their shareholders decided that they could spend that money elsewhere. So they never really made the investments necessary. They were insufficient, or there were minimal investments to make to bring the full potential of the airport to the full. I think those were the main reasons. And by 2013, when they sold it, and indeed a couple of years before that, they had decided that they were going to look for an exit as rapidly as possible, and the market at that time for acquiring small airports from an investment point of view had taken a big dive. So whereas they'd been popular in the 2000s, by 2009, 2010, nobody was buying small airports.
And why was that at that particular time, 2009-10?
It was post-recession. The level of traffic had declined, particularly in smaller airports. Simply, in fact, right away across the piece, but most particularly in smaller airports, they suffered greatest. And I think just the uncertainty of the market, it made it difficult to attract investment, and there were other opportunities for Infratil elsewhere. I mean, most of their portfolio is based in Australasia, and obviously it was taking a lot of management time. So having spoken to the people who ran it and known them reasonably well, that was an underlying driver. It was a bad investment made in 2005, which, because of the recession, they weren't able to deliver on.
And in your view, in terms of the failure of Infratil to actually make any investment into the airport, what was the effect of that lack of investment in your view, in terms of the success or otherwise of the airport?
It meant that the facilities that were needed, and there was only one aircraft stand, there was some investment into the cargo shed and one or two facilities for equestrian operations. But the level of investment that would be needed to attract significant carriers was simply not sufficient, and it didn't give people confidence. We also have to understand at that time, the infrastructure funds had started to move away from investing in these kind of airport facilities. It was more difficult to get debt because of the recessionary period. So the ability to attract new operators was at its most difficult in that period.
Can I just have your help with this? Because those that essentially oppose the reopening of Manston Airport point to the failure of Infratil to make a success of it. In your view, are there reasons why Infratil failed to make a success of it, and do those reasons still pertain now and into the future?
No, I mean the level of investment they made in management resource time into attracting cargo was insufficient. They spent a lot of time trying to attract passenger airlines, and with one or two successes, the KLM route did attract 30,000 to 40,000 passengers, and basically meant that the opportunities were not being fully sought out, and the level of investment that you need to make in terms of discounts up front to operators and in terms of enhanced facilities were not there. So I think with the kind of investment that River Oak are planning to make, which is very substantial, to create the right kind of platform where major airlines, cargo airlines, and indeed one or two passenger airlines can see that there is significant investment being made into the site, will give them confidence that there is a long-term opportunity, and that's one of the biggest differences.
And is that biggest difference that you identify, can that be contrasted with Infratrail and the previous owners, Williams, in that respect?
Yes, I think that level of investment of the kind that we're talking about, which is Mr. Varell will talk about in more detail, is many times the kind of investment that was made. Both owners effectively were running it as minimal cost that they could, and the aim was to minimise the level of capital investment until they could get some sort of return, when actually to generate the kind of levels of activity that are needed actually does require significant investment, as I found both working in an airport that is similar to this and you see across the small airport sector.
Thank you. Can we come back please to your summary? I think we've got to paragraph 1.6 please.
Sure. Equally, it's clear to me that Lothian Shelf Developments have never had any intention of making the kind of investment committed that was needed to turn Manston round. Rather, the airport was bought speculatively as a long-term property investment.
Now, just pausing there, you refer to Lothian Shelf Developments, but the airport was purchased by Manston Skyport. It's now, we understand, is being promoted by Stonehill Park in terms of the new scheme. But can you just explain those different companies, different owners?
They're broadly all the same owners, and exactly what the arrangements are between the owners, but the majority owners and Globe. So basically, we're talking. The core investment interest is the same and has been consistently throughout.
And why do you say that there was never any real intention on behalf of the owner, at that time Manston Skyport and say Van Gogh, to run Manston as an airport? Why do you say that?
Well, initially she promised to take 2 years to see whether there were any opportunities, any markets that could allow the airports to turn round. But in the end, she took 3 months before deciding to shut it. My experience of actually running an airport is you can't decide anything in 3 months. You barely get to know it, let alone have actually sounded out the market thoroughly. And as far as I'm aware, there was no significant pieces of work that were done into major alternative development scenarios, particularly of the kind that River Oak are now talking about. Basically what was looked at was primarily are there any way of stripping out any more costs, and was there any immediate carrier who could be attracted to be on the site within 12 to 18 months. And the aviation industry doesn't work like that. It frequently takes a lot longer to build up those kind of relationships. So the 2 years was a reasonable time period to see whether things could be turned around, but she never actually completed that. She decided within 3 months. And it looked suspiciously like an exercise in ticking the boxes so that she could shut it as soon as possible.
Thank you. Can we then come back, please, to your summary, paragraph 1.7?
Since 2011, I've acted first as an independent consultant then as a director of North Point, helping to advise mainly smaller regional airports on strategy and government policy matters. That would include virtually all the small regional airports in the UK. In 2013, I initiated the idea for a new industry association specifically to look after the interests of smaller airports. This regional and business airports group has now grown to 38 airport members, commissions research, makes representations to government on its members' behalf, and is on a number of DFT steering groups.
Thank you. And then if we turn to section 2 of your evidence, you set out there the shortcomings of the Avia Solutions report on Manston. And can I ask you to read 2.1, please?
Sure. Unlike the author of the Avia Solutions report, or Lothian Shelf Developments and Advisors, I have extensive and direct relevant experience of how this kind of airport asset can be transformed and what it takes to do so. I can point to and interpolate lessons to be learned from other benchmark airports which share the same mixed activity business model of the kind River Oak proposing to implement at Manston. They include Alliance Fort Worth in Texas, Hamilton Airport in Ontario, Shannon in Ireland, Bergamo in Italy, Liège in Belgium, and Leipzig in Germany. It also means that the passenger-focused business model set out in the ABS Solutions report, which Thanet District Council have chosen to rely upon to validate a new policy stance in relation to the airport, i.e. that there is no evidence of a commercial future for an airport operation at Manston, is at best misguided and at worst deliberate misrepresentation of River Oak's plans.
So just 2 questions there. You make a reference to Alliance Fort Worth. Does one of the directors of River Oak have experience in respect to that particular airport? So can you just explain what it is?
Yes. River Oak were responsible for some refinancing of Alliance Fort Worth in Texas, and therefore will have needed to understand the business model of the airport and gone through a detailed due diligence process. So they are familiar with this kind of mixed-use development, which that airport includes cargo, business aviation, aircraft servicing, and a range of other activities. It's a non-passenger airport. It's profitable, and it shows that the kind of proposals they're putting forward can work if it's done in the right way. And it's worth saying that that airport is in the same system as Manston is to Dallas-Fort Worth. So again, it's 2 very large airports in the same way that the southeast of England have. So these specialist niche airports can find a role. It's a case of making sure that you've researched that thoroughly and have a set of partners who are willing to make the investment in terms of their aircraft and in terms of developing property and servicing activities at the airport.
And in terms of thorough research and appropriate and willing partners, looking back at firstly at Wiggins and secondly at Infratel, were those 2 matters undertaken in respect of that airport as far as you can understand?
Not as far as I'm aware. There were a number of representations made at the time of the white paper when Wiggins made it, which were, I think, very speculative in terms of the level of passenger throughput that the airport could achieve. There was always a consciousness that Manston was serving a specialist freight function and a curiosity as to why that opportunity was not being exploited further. In terms of Infratil, we've talked at length about that, but again, the absence of the kind of research that River Oak have done, and Dr. Dixon will be presenting some of that work, which is detailed and thorough, means that actually understanding the niches. It's all about, with small airports, finding niches. They're not in the business of trying to compete directly with large airports in the southeast system. It's serving particular sub-markets, particular areas. It needs very careful analysis and, most importantly, I think, very detailed market sounding to get a clear indication. It's very easy to do everything based on spreadsheets, but actually there is, in this industry, it's very much a business-to-business industry, and you need to have direct conversations with people who are going to put their aircraft into your airport, and that's a major part of an airport director's job.
And insofar as the need for that very detailed market research, insofar as the Aviation Solutions report is concerned, was that undertaken from what you can see from that?
No, I mean, they refer to 8 interviews, and I'm not entirely clear exactly what the relevance of some of those interviews. They look to me to be 3 or 4 that were potentially directly relevant. Contrast that with the work that Dr. Dixon's done, where she's looked at least 20 interviews with carriers. And also been much more thorough in her background research of trends in the industry. I mean, it was said earlier that the market for freight has been flat and remains flat. Well, that's simply not true. The market is actually, the most recent statistics were produced yesterday, and year-on-year growth is 8.4% across Europe. This is sourced from ACI. And Boeing World Cargo forecasts are forecasting 3.7% growth across Europe. So there is actually an upturn in the market. It's clear. You have to keep in mind CAA statistics are about 18 months behind. And that's not unsurprising, because there has been a pent-up, as economic growth returns, cargo is very much correlated with GDP and different types of activity, and that's now coming through into the marketplace and is expected to continue.
So just pause you there. Insofar as Mrs. Livingston is suggesting to the inquiry that the freight market is a mature, sorry, Mr. McIntyre is suggesting that the freight is a mature market, which effectively has flatlined at 2.3 million tonnes. In your view, is that correct?
No.
Insofar as she's suggesting that the freight forwarding market is in decline, is that correct in your view?
No, the major issue that there's been for freight forwarders is the absence of capacity because of the constraints at Heathrow, and because low-cost carriers are increasingly the main operators out of Stansted and Gatwick, so the belly hold market has been constrained. It's also worth pointing out, and actually Aviation Solutions do flag this, but in a kind of partial kind of way, that the type of aircraft that are being brought in now tend to have less belly hold capacity, and it's of a smaller configuration. And even Heathrow is likely to see a lot more low-cost carriers when the third runway opens, if it opens, and they are not interested in carrying cargo. It slows down their turnaround of their operations. So actually what we're likely to see is growth in belly hold on long-haul aircraft going to 120 different destinations, but we're probably also likely to see increased in dedicated freighter operations taking particular types of freight, perishables, large pieces of equipment, and that activity which we saw in the 2000s when there was a very strong electronics sector in the UK, that can grow extremely rapidly depending on the kind of things that happen in the economy. So there are a number of other factors which we also need to keep in mind, and particularly one of those is the amount of freight that is being trucked out of the UK to fly out of airports on the continent. And that looks like there are very substantial volumes. Only a couple of days ago we had confirmation from one of the freight forwarders that they are putting an average of 17 trucks a day through the Channel ports to go to airports in other parts of the EU, and that's just one forwarder, and there are an awful lot of them. and that fits with the evidence that both TfL and York Aviation came up with, that there is very substantial volumes being trucked across. First of all, that's not economically efficient either for the consignees or for the country. And secondly, that is going to become much more difficult prospectively in 2019 if there are new border controls imposed and more new border costs for going across, which is going to make it more of an opportunity for cargo airlines to be interested in using somewhere like Manston, where they can fly in and deliver freight directly.
Thank you. And then coming back to 2.1, you said that the Avia Solutions report was misguided in understanding what the test plans were for Manston Airport. Why do you say that?
Because I understand, I wasn't present, there was a meeting at which they were offered a confidential look at River Oaks business plans, and they didn't accept that, and basically all they had was an hour or hour and a half meeting, which is, in my view, if I was doing this work, when there is such an important proponent of an alternative outcome for the airport, like that analysis should have been done in far greater depth. It suggests they didn't actually want to hear what River Oaks had to say, because it didn't fit with their own preconceptions. And I think they missed a major opportunity. The fact that they also didn't look or understand whether this kind of business model has worked anywhere else, the kind of airports that I've talked about, and virtually all of those airports are profitable. So this kind of business model can work, and that was a major failing in the report that Avia composed.
Thank you. Coming back then to your summary, you said 2.2 that your evidence essentially is a critique of the Avia Solutions report.
Yes.
In 2.3, I don't think we need to take up time, do we, on passenger forecasts?
No.
So can we look at your forecast for passengers, Dr. Dixon's forecast for passengers, and the Avia Solutions forecasts for passengers? They're all broadly comparable, aren't they?
They are within the limits of that you can, the levels of accuracy that can be achieved by forecasts looking 50 to 20 years ahead. They're within the limits of deviation. They're broadly comparable and sensible. And I think what's actually useful is that those numbers have been derived under three different methodologies, and they broadly come to the same conclusion, which suggests that the ballpark figures that there are probably not far off.
So, insofar as the suggestion that by about 2030 there will be broadly over 1 million passengers going through Manston Airport, is there any material or real dispute between you and the Avia Solutions report and also Dr. Dixon as to that eventuality?
No.
So I think the dispute's on the freight, so can we come back then please to your summary?
Yeah.
And pick it up at the report, please.
The main thing is that it's the freight proposals that will form the central plank of River Oaks' development consent order submission to the Planning Inspectorate later this year. Those proposals are consistent with York Aviation's report for the Freight Transport Association, of which many of the freight forwarders are members, and Transport for London in 2013, the Department for Transport's 2009 predictions of increased cross-channel displacement of air cargo, which is very much the evidence that we've been picking up from the market, and Dr. Dixon's very detailed bottom-up analysis of the cargo market in her separate evidence. The latter, which includes undertaking interviews with 24 industry experts, including representatives from DHL and FedEx, and I have significant concerns that by comparison the much smaller number of somewhat eclectic and self-selected mix of experts, in fact it appears that the guy who wrote the report interviewed one of his own colleagues, that Avia's report relies upon does not offer any equivalency in terms of robustness and credible evidence to the kind of thing that Dr. Dixon has produced.